So, I want to, you're here for a Stress Buster if you're joining us online. Charlotte, do you want to just share the link with our life group? Just say to them to go onto the St. D's website, because I'm going to post it through for people. It's just an open link. Steve, could you just take take me down a bit, because it's a bit ringy. It's a bit too loud for this number of people. Bit more. Sorry, I just have to use this for the stream. Great, okay, perfect. So I want to talk about stress tonight, and I call this Stress Buster, and I do it in some locations to help people particularly get a bit more control and find a bit more peace. So that's what we're hoping to do in this next 40 minutes or so, if that's all right with you. I'm going to ask you to talk to one another a little bit, but hopefully not in an embarrassing way, so you just feel relaxed, and if you're near someone, it's a chance to turn around and chat to them. The first thing we want to ask is, what is stress? When we think about stress, let's have some feedback from the floor. What is stress? Give me some shout-outs, some experiences. When I say stress, what do you think? Red mist? Overwhelmed? Tense, great. Tears, okay. Any others? Some good ones there. Pressure, okay. Great. Now what you've given me, which is what every group gives me, is a reflection on our response to stress. So when I say stress, everyone automatically gives me the overwhelmed language, the blood pressure rising, the feeling of like tearfulness, or the feeling of dread, all of those kind of experiences. So what they're describing there is not actually stress, it's their response to stress. And that's really, really important, because in order to understand stress, we need to work out what stress actually is, and then we can potentially change the way in which we respond to it. But if stress is a feeling of overwhelm, then I can't really do very much about that. But if my response to stress is a feeling of overwhelm, I can respond in a new way which will transform my experience of stress. So there's good news for us all. I'm using some cognitive behavioral therapy style framing tonight, so that will help you to change your behavior in response to what is stress. So stress actually, in biological terms at least, is anything that requires your brain or your body to adapt or react. That's a pretty broad definition. It's anything that will create or cause your body to react or adapt. Now, if you think about that practically, from the moment you start your day, stress becomes your reality. So the phone is a classic example. Now, if a green tick or little ping or image appears on that screen, it's saying there's a message waiting for you. And as you address that message, you're responding to stress. It doesn't matter if that message says, you've just won £1,000 in some sort of lottery you didn't enter. The fact that it's interrupted your flow and calling you to respond or react means it's stress. It's causing you to adapt your behavior, either biologically or practically psychologically. So you're being called into a state of change. And stress is ultimately an experience of ongoing change. And we say to change is to live. It's one of the 7 states of being. Change is the necessity, and change is our reality. Change is here to stay, so we need to become good at adapting well to change, the requirement to change all the time, in order for us to live well. So I want you to kind of think about that reality, that anything that causes you or calls you into change or adaptation is ultimately a stressor. How's that feel? Stressful. Okay, because actually we start realizing how much stress we are naturally under in the day-to-day. And what we do know about stress is that stress is not something that's all in your mind. I guess I'm a child of the 70s, but really kind of grew up in the sort of 80s and 90s, and there was a really unhealthy and quite toxic culture around masculinity and emotion, which largely orientated around the kind of challenge was to man up, and the idea, I don't know what that means for women, but that's what I experienced as a man. Man up, and actually, if you feel stressed, it's all in your mind. And all you need to do is just basically ignore whatever pressure you're feeling and just carry on going and get to whatever end destination you want to get to. For about 4 years or 3 years, I had a rowing coach who was a psychiatrist. not of the good style. I work with a psychiatrist a lot, and he's great. But this was a psychiatrist who was very interested in humans' ability to go beyond the thresholds of pain, which made him a terrible rowing coach. Because, we'd go out for sort of triple outings in the rain and snow, and he'd always say, "It's all in your mind," through the megaphone, whilst he was wearing a sort of full Atlantic protection suit, and we were wearing singlets, and it was sort of mid-November in Abingdon, and the waves were sort of lapping over the riggers, and "It's all in your mind," and then we'd do double outing, and then he'd go, "We're going to go again, it's all in your mind." It was always all in our mind, and I'm like blue and shaking and hyperventilating. I've got no sugar in my body, and it was apparently all in my mind. It's not all in your mind. Stress is an important response, and actually stress is manifest in one of three really significant systems that basically rule our body and mind. It's called the limbic system. We call it also the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system has two key branches, what we call the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. And the sympathetic nervous system is the one, it's actually sort of named, I always find it slightly odd that it's called the sympathetic nervous system, because it never feels very sympathetic to me. But it's called also the fight or flight response. You will have heard that term used quite commonly in society at large. Oh, someone's got the fight or flight, or they're a bit panicky. And the fight or flight response actually is what's called an adaptive response to stress. Now, we talk about adaptive, meaning positive, and maladaptive, being negative. An adaptive response to stress is when you experience stress, your body and your mind change as a result of your encounter with whatever thing is challenging you to change. So it's not in your mind, it's in all of you. It's in your body, it's in your brain, it's in your emotions, and it's not something that you can just switch off and say, oh, I can ignore that. And actually what we do know about stress is that the more we ignore stress, the more of a problem stress becomes. So I want to kind of give you permission to say, actually, it might be hard. Sometimes it's like a magician's trick. You watch the trick as a punter, and you're like, oh, wow, how does he do that? And then someone comes in and shows you the sleeve or the wand and whatever it is. It's a bit disappointing to start with, but actually knowing what's happening is helpful, not destructive. And I want you to know what's happening a little bit more in order that you can be a bit more sympathetic to yourself as you move through. Stress is important, it's adaptive, because ultimately in some circumstances it's life-saving. So if you think about this guy, in a minute, I think when he turns around, he's going to have quite a shock, because there is actually a great white shark following his kayak. Which would, I think, unsettle most people. Now, what he's going to experience within a quarter of a second is a huge amount of hormone pumped into his bloodstream, particularly cortisol and noradrenaline, and they're going to do to him something very powerful, which is they're going to tighten and constrict his small capillaries, pushing blood away from his extremities in towards his core. Now that's helpful because that feeds his major muscle group's ability to expend high levels of energy. So his muscles are going to tighten, his major muscle groups are going to tighten, so he can paddle faster. His pupils are going to dilate to let more light in to enable an increase in his peripheral vision so that he can see the shark if it happens to swim off to the left or right hand side. So his vision's going to become more acute. His hearing is going to sharpen, and actually his hearing will start ringing as his blood pressure increases, and actually his attentiveness will also increase because he can hear threat through his ears and see threat through his eyes. His breathing is going to increase because he's going to increase his ability to oxygenate those major muscle groups that are going to enable him to paddle really, really quickly. And he's probably going to find that his extremities become cold quite quickly, and his core is going to get quite clammy quite quickly, as there's a temperature differential between his extremities and his center. And his heart rate is going to increase, obviously, because that's what your heart does. It pumps faster to get more blood around your body. There's a few of the physical changes he's going to experience. And that's all helpful because hopefully he's going to paddle to shore relatively quickly and live to paddle another day. Now, our autonomic nervous system responds brilliantly to significant threat because actually that's what's life-saving and that's what's necessary. And humans are particularly good at identifying significant threat, and that's what tends to keep us alive. So I want you to befriend your stress system rather than labeling it the feeling of overwhelm or the feeling of tearfulness or the feeling of dread. See it as something beneficial, a response to a circumstance that requires you to change, and a lot of physiological and psychological changes that enable you to deal with that threat better. That's what stress should be, and that's how stress should work. But there are other sorts of stress in our lives. Have a look at this sort of stress right now. Now, I want you to think about every single driver in every one of those cars and vans right now. How do you think they're feeling? Annoyed, okay, great. Other things? Constrained. Panicked, great. Frustrated. Overwhelmed, anxious, helpless, filled with dread. Angry, okay. Are they safer or less safe than they would be if traffic was flowing normally? Right, they're safer, aren't they? They're safer because actually the chance of dying in that car crash, I think, is really very, very small. But actually, if that traffic was flowing at normal speed, there's a significant chance of a life-threatening accident or incident. So they're safer than they've ever been, and yet they're experiencing more stress than they've ever experienced, or they might experience in their day. So stress is not something that necessarily is a response to a change that was life-saving. Stress is often a response to something that is long or enduring and also problematic or frustrating. Now, I'd love you just to have a little buzz with the person next to you about circumstances in which you regularly feel stressed, which aren't life-threatening. Just have a chat about any circumstances that you find regularly frustrating and create stress in your life, just for a couple of minutes. Okay, let's get some feedback. Give me some examples. Has anyone got any examples they're happy to share? Shout them out. What examples have you got for me? Work, okay. Work in general. Brilliant. Lots and lots of people asking for things all at the same time. Great, that's really common stress. Other things. Unread emails. Brilliant. Next slide. Okay, great. Other things.
Sometimes like social stuff, so like replying to people's messages.
Okay, yeah. Again, it falls in the demand stress experience, yeah. Other things. Okay, yeah, arguments, discords, brilliant, really helpful. Being late, okay, goes back to the traffic jam. Uncertainty about the future, okay, so that's what we call anticipatory stress. So anticipatory stress is a really significant part of distress. So I want to get in your minds the distinction between stress and distress. So stress, as I've said, is actually good for you in certain circumstances. Distress is very rarely ever good for you. And anticipatory stress is part of distress. It's imagining things that are going to happen which are problematic when actually they might not happen, or they might not happen in the way you anticipate them. And we had over here what we call compound stress. That's when you've got multiple stressors all overwhelming you all at the same time. And we've had, again, anticipatory stress again with being late, what's going to happen when I'm late. And social stress, there's particular responses. We might have to sort of social anxiety. And again, we're looking there at demand. It was a demand-based stress because it's saying, what does this environment require of me? And we're not sure that we can meet its demands. So stress can fall into a number of different baskets. The key thing about stress, it's normally high demand, high attention, and high importance. So stress that is destructive is when there is a high demand, like I have to get to this location on time, I have to respond to these people immediately. There's high attention, as in I need to attend to this immediately. That's the social situation or the family argument. Or the high importance. This is kind of really, really significant. Life is going to fall apart unless this happens. So you know occasionally there are things that are low-level stressors. They're things that you can say, oh, it doesn't really matter. Similar as we say that, oh, that's not that important. And so we're not really activated by it because actually it's a low tier. But as soon as it moves into the mid-tier, that's quite important. That's enough to trigger a very strong stress response in us, and that's when it quickly becomes overwhelming. And what I'm always trying to do with people is to create light and shade in their response to stress. To say, actually, the purpose here is not to become unstressed, if you like, that we don't experience real change or real pressure, because that's normal. What's important here is that we create light and shade between the things that require our attention and those things that don't. And that's why it's so important to recognize that stress is not avoidable. So what our journey here is not about saying, well, let's avoid stress. In fact, as a strategy, stress avoidance is one of the most futile and damaging strategies. The reason is that often stress avoidance actually becomes stress displacement. So what happens is we try and avoid things that stress us, and we build up massive accounts with things that will become ultimately stressful and far more damaging. And people often do this where debt is concerned. So they become stressed about money. We know this from Crosslight. They become stressed about money. They become stressed every time a bill comes through the letterbox. Rather than opening the bill and addressing the problem, they bury the bill in a box of bills. Getting a lot of nods here from a carrier bag of bills. And because they're not willing to challenge that early stress that says, actually, I could defer payment, I could have a payment plan in place, I could find a way of resolving the problem, it becomes a catastrophic stress, which is actually, I'm cut off by the electricity company, or I'm now filing for bankruptcy, or whatever it is that happens to be the challenge. So stress is not avoidable, and stress avoidance is never helpful. If we take a lighter topic like the social setting, stress avoidance quickly becomes agoraphobia. Because actually I withdraw from social setting because I find social demand too challenging. The result is actually I become agoraphobic and unable even to leave my house to go to the supermarket because I'm so afraid of the stress of encountering others. So if we have a mentality towards stress avoidance, we're often creating much, much bigger problems. I don't want you to be stress avoidant. I want to help you to manage your stress better. And this is about managing stress, is about asking again, how are we responding to the stress that we're experiencing? Have a look at these two sorts of people. When we think about stress, most people assume that they're the guy on the right-hand side here with the sort of brick on his head. Because that's what we often think about stress. Oh, I'm so stressed right now, I'm so bogged down, I'm so weighed down, I'm so overwhelmed. But our assumption of where we should be is these two kind of Zen individuals on the left-hand side who are having a wonderful time doing yoga on the beach. Now, if this is our view of what looking like stress management, we're lost. If this is what we think stress management is, then we've got a massive problem. The problem is a problem of expectation. And actually, it's this sort of boom or bust mentality which leaves so many people stressed for the long term. And what they're doing here is they're saying, you know, I can work like this with a weight on my head for 6 months, and then I'll have a mega holiday in Greece, and I'm going to completely reset, feel completely free, feel completely liberated, then I'll come back and I'll do it all over again. And I can do that. And that might have worked in the 1980s when people had regulated work hours and they didn't have emails. But that isn't enough today to make it work. So imagine we've got a boat. Major stress is like a hole in the bottom of the boat, a ginormous hole. And that stress might be a health issue, a relationship breakdown, it might be a loss of job, it might be a financial catastrophe. It's obvious the boat is sinking because there's a huge, great hole in the bottom of the boat. But most people don't sink from stress because of that. Because the first thing you do is you go, oh my goodness, there's a massive hole in my boat, I need to fix it. Most people's boat sinks because there are 1,000 tiny holes that have been drilled in the boat. And actually you don't notice the boat is sinking. And actually you can't find remedy to that because you're not addressing it. It's all so diffuse and it's got so many different angles and dynamics to it. So we need to think about a different way of approaching stress management, which isn't boom or bust. Just acknowledge, have you been a boom or bust person in the past? In terms of like, I'm going to just get fixed. Right, great. So that idea is a futile idea, because you will all know that a week after you've come back from your holiday, you cannot remember being on holiday. And the level of stress you had like week 1 post-holiday is sort of 50% of where you were on holiday, but week 2 you're back to where you were before. In fact, because there's so many emails now in your inbox, it's unbelievably stressful to go on holiday. And we were chatting even this morning in this session with someone who works for one of the big consulting companies in London, and I was describing what I call sugar rush stress, which is that you're so stressed, it becomes like, oh my goodness, I've just got to keep on keeping on doing this, I've got to do this. And you start listing out another 1,000 things you don't even need to do because you're so high on stress that you want to kind of do everything. And then you try and go on holiday and you accept a low level of stress because actually not doing your emails feels stressful, so you can't even relax then. So you say, well, I'll just do it at 6 o'clock every morning while the family aren't watching, and then I'll get to stay on top of things. Have you heard yourself saying that? I'm going to stay on top of things. So then when I come back, it's not going to be that stressful. So we get sugar rush stress, which is like stress on stress because we're stressed and we just need to keep on doing stuff. And then we get this baseline stress where we accept massive compromises to stay on top of things so we don't get so stressed when we get back from holiday, which means our holidays are of poor quality anyway because we're basically engaging with all sorts of work issues when we should actually be resting. Can you see how damaging the dynamic is? And one person this morning was saying again how challenging it was post-COVID, because even before COVID there was some agreement that actually you were now off duty and therefore your email might not be responded to. But now in a post-pandemic world where everyone's already been working successfully online for a really long time, everyone expects you to be working 24/7, 365 anyway, and they know you should be because it's worked. So there are massive problems where stress regulation is concerned because suddenly we're in this new worldview and it requires us not to be boom or bust, but to begin to drain the boat through a number of different holes. So like to drain out the water as much as the water is draining in. And that means small targeted interventions rather than these great grand kind of I'm going to finish the problem kind of intervention. Now I want you again just to buzz with a neighbour nearby about boom or bust versus small interventions. What big ticket things do you do to reduce stress, but are there any small ticket things you can do to reduce stress or you do to reduce stress at the moment? Just a couple of minutes with your neighbour. Okay, I'm going to get you back together. I've heard a number of things filtering through, which is great. Quite a few people owning up to the sort of boom or bust mentality. And that's really helpful. But also hearing things like walks and exercise and little things, little changes we can make. I want to start thinking now about changes, real changes that we can make, which will enable us to focus in again and light and shade on those things that really need to be addressed. So what we've said so far is stress is fundamentally good for you. Actually, you need stress because everyone needs to change because that's what life is. But that distress comes when we are overloaded with demand to the point at which we no longer function well. And that stress often feels like a feeling before it feels like a demand. And we have to work out actually what's my response to what's going on and how can I change that. And one way in which we can edit out a significant amount of stress is about looking at the way in which we predict the future. So if you think about a response to stressful situations, like the guy in the kayak, ultimately he didn't plan that. He probably didn't imagine it. I can't imagine that he imagined, I'm going to go kayaking today and there's going to be a great white shark that suddenly pops up and starts following me around. He's not going to imagine it's going to be happening. But when he's in the moment, his stress is helpful in getting him to shore. That sort of stress, reactive stress, is helpful because we're reacting to something, but predictive stress is very rarely ever helpful because predictive stress creates problems which we haven't experienced yet and tells us that we're not going to be able to manage them when we do experience them. But then we don't experience them because we can't actually predict the future. So staying present is a really key way in which we can manage our stress. And making negative interpretations about what's going to happen next nearly always creates more stress. Because not only do we create a negative interpretation, but we also create a diminished or negative interpretation of our ability to cope. So we say X is going to happen and I'm not going to be able to handle that. So what we're doing there is supercharging our stress response and saying, oh my goodness, not only is it going to be challenging, but also I'm definitely not going to be able to handle it. And so we've got the stress of the situation and the stress of our own perceived deficiency, which means we're doubly stressed, both at target and at capability. So I want you to think about your ability to predict the future. Working a lot as I do in anxiety, I tend to find that we all have an anxious mind, but particularly where it comes to future predictions, we are very flawed, but 90% of our predictions never come anywhere near true, and therefore if we can reduce our negative predictions, we can find a lot of airtime to focus on the things that are really happening. And one great question we can ask ourselves when we're dealing with our future self is to say, is this happening, and do I need to respond? And that nearly always shocks us into a, no, it's not happening, and no, I don't need to respond. So is it happening, and do I need to respond? Are great questions to ask when it comes to the imaginings of your mind about the future. Stress sometimes can lead us to believe that we're going to burn out. This is a classic stress bell graph. Everyone thinks if they start thinking about stress that they're going to end up in the red zone in burnout. And one other dysfunctional, maladaptive way in which we can manage stress is by saying, I need to be less stressed. Now, that might be objectively true, but it's practically very unhelpful. Who's had a friend, a partner, a family member, a parent say, oh, you just need to be less stressed? It's like so annoying. It's such an annoying thing. Try doing my job. Try having my family. Try dealing with this issue. Then you'll see how stressed you are. You feel really affronted by that idea. It's like people saying to you, don't worry. Don't you think I've tried that before? It's a really, a really frustrating and unhelpful way of describing things. Making negative predictions that you're going to burn out because you're stressed is unhelpful. Saying be less stressed is unhelpful. Recognizing that stress is necessary and good is also significant. If you look at this bell graph, you'll see that optimum stress leads to peak performance. Actually, if you're under stressed, you cannot actually reach peak performance. So look at the bell graph. The pinnacle of someone's performance is also at their peak stress. And stress will help you to achieve your peak performance. The key question is not, is stress a problem, but how long am I stressed? Because that's the real problem. So if you go back to GCSE physics, you will have done Hooke's law. Who can remember that? So the spring and the weights. So Hooke's law was proven when the spring stopped returning to its original shape. So what it said was there's a certain level of pressure or force which will bend the spring out of place. Now, there are two ways of proving Hooke's law. One was to put a very, very heavy weight onto the spring and let it just drop, and then take the weight off, and the spring was bent out of shape and wouldn't return to its original shape. You could find that point at which you could put enough weight on the spring so the spring would just return to shape. And there was this tiny little gap between deforming the spring and allowing the spring to return to its original springiness. But you could also prove Hooke's law by putting the weight on and leaving the weight on the spring overnight and coming back to the lab the next day. And what you found was that even though in the short-term experiment the spring had returned to original shape when you'd taken the weight off, the same weight could cause the spring to completely elongate to the floor overnight and had lost its springiness. The key point being that if you're loaded up for too long with a weight that was manageable in the short term, in the long term it will become unmanageable. Now, if you apply that to your experience of stress, what we're saying here is that you've got capacity to be springy, to remain resilient over the long haul, so long as you're unloaded for significant periods of time. But if you stay overloaded for too long, Hooke's law is proven, and you begin to experience distress and be pushed out of shape. So think about that sort of in application. What's key here is the way in which you respond in your lifestyle to unload as well as to load. In the French Revolution, the French were so keen to get away from the Gregorian calendar, which they knew was Christian, they decided to change the working week shape to 10 days from 7. And actually, for 4 years, the French working week was 10 days. And people's mental health was catastrophic. The workforce were falling down because we are designed to work on a 7-day schedule. And the workforce was so depleted in those 4 years that they had to revert back to a 7-day week to enable the workforce to actually function. It shows you that actually the 7-day week works. And so having a day of unload in your week is fundamental to your ability to manage stress. But I'd still say that even the weekly model is boom or bust, because in today's society, one day in a 24-hour days working week isn't enough to enable you to manage your stress levels. And you need to make sure that you're regulating your stress on a daily basis, not on a weekly basis. We need to move our minds, if you like, into a place where we can have micro rests rather than macro rests. So this is this idea that we're not saving up our stress reduction to the weekend. We're actually taking time every day to manage stress reduction. And I use two kind of principles for that, which I'll talk about in a minute, but the primary one for now is about margin. It's the time that you spend between the things that cause you demand. And efficiency is never efficient where mental health is concerned. So the monetarized world we live in are all about efficiency in the short term. The problem is they don't understand the cost of long-term health disability, which is a key factor facing businesses today. What we should be thinking about is actually psychological inefficiency enables productivity and therefore efficiency in the workplace. And so our inefficiency, our inability to work task to task to task requires gaps, requires margin, requires space, enables us to unload significantly so our performance can remain peak. If you think about climbing Everest as an example, I talk to a lot of climbers. What are you doing? I'm training to climb Everest. Okay, great. But Jordan Light in Scientific American wrote a brilliant article about how 53% of people who die climbing Everest die on the way down, whereas only 17% of people who die climbing Everest die on the way up. The other people die in camp, just in case you're wondering. So 17% die climbing up, 53% die climbing down. So if I ask you, are you climbing Everest? You should say, I'm training to climb down Everest, not I'm training to climb up Everest. Because success is not measured by your ability to get to the top of the mountain. Success is measured by your ability to get to the top of the mountain and then back down the mountain again. And in work productivity, we should be asking not just have you completed your task, but have you completed your task and now rested, and now you're ready for the next task. We should be helping people to go up the mountain, come back down the mountain again, because the task is not complete unless you've got back to the airport, Kathmandu airport car park. That is success. It's no good if you climb the mountain and you've died at the top. That's not success. So a lot of us have got a working mentality which says, I've got to climb to the top of the mountain, I've got to stay there and find another mountain to climb. But actually we need to help people to say, actually, how can I climb to the top of the mountain? And how can I climb back to a place of success, which is unload? And what are you doing every day to enable unload in your life? Part of this is about changing our predictions. Typically what keeps us up at the top of the mountain are all or nothing mentalities. I've got to get this done. I've just got to finish this task. I can't not. That's the sugar rush stress. I can't not do this. I've just got to keep on doing it. I've got to do this. And I'm saying to someone, what are you doing right now? I've got to just send this email. You're like, well, that's not even related to the thing you're worried about. I know, but I've just got to do it anyway. So I've got to do is all or nothing. Generalizing the negative, everything is bad. This stress is all going to kill me. I'm so overwhelmed right now. There's no light or shade in our articulation of task. Historic evidence. Oh, last time I tried to have a rest, this happened. I got fired, or some other imagining. Emotional reasoning, everyone will think I'm a total failure unless I get this done. Like everyone thinks I'm a loser at work. Everyone thinks I can't produce anything. So that whole, I need to do this, I need to push myself beyond because everyone thinks. Self-referencing, other people have a rest, but I just can't. Like, why? What makes you special? And then hyper-responsible, everyone's depending on me. So these mentalities around catastrophic thinking supercharge the narrative. And most people who struggle with stress have a really harsh inner critic that's kind of beating them on the journey, constantly making them overextend themselves. And rest often hasn't been familiarly modeled. So like life at home was always busy, always chaotic, and there was a lot of judgment around achievement. So there was no, oh look, mum's on the sofa watching daytime TV. That would have been like, oh my goodness, like what's wrong with mum? She's having a breakdown. She's watching daytime TV. Or like, oh, dad's asleep on Sunday afternoon. Oh my goodness, like what's happening to dad? He's slowing down. He must have dementia. Those kind of ideas, which are really often not modeled, particularly in Western, high-functioning Western families where there's like a lot of achievement orientation. There's this drive, you've got to keep on, everyone's got to be busy, how many hobbies have you got? Kids are in clubs every single night, it's all that kind of stuff. Realistic, moderate outlook, seize the positives, present, future focus, emotional awareness, inclusive vision, proportionate action, all of those help us keep stress from distress, enable us to stay present and go, actually, right now, I know what I need. And when I coach executives largely, and nearly always, I see a measure of health in executives I'm working with when they start saying things like, I know what I need. Sometimes there's some delusion there. I know what I need, and it's just one day a year off. That's delusion. But when I hear executives saying things like, now I know what I need to stay well, it'll be different for everyone. There's not a sort of prescription for you, but it's that I know what I need to kind of keep the wolf from my door emotionally. I've got to change my response. Here's a picture of me and my wife Lou. I had a mental health breakdown in 2005, complex PTSD and anxiety disorder after the London bombings, Edgware Road Station. And part of my recovery was about, I guess I had probably about 9 months of medication therapy, quite intensively, and time off work, and then this is probably at the 12-month point. It's about a year after the bombings. I think this is in July 2006. And so my wife's idea of me doing recovery was going on a sort of unsupported jungle trek around Borneo, because she thought, if it doesn't kill you or make you stronger, kind of an idea. So like much cajoling, and actually even at Kathmandu, to Kota Kinabalu airport, I remember thinking, I can't do this. But she's tougher than me, and we were climbing this mountain. You could just about see the curvature of the earth. It's not a brilliant photograph behind us. And you slept here overnight in a little banda hut, and this is just after the dawn. It's a big mountain from the forest floor, because it really is 4,095 meters from sea level, and you're walking from sea level. So it's not like you're up that bit higher where you're like joining it already at 4,000 meters and you're going up to 8,000 meters. It's 4,000 meters from top to bottom, and you're doing all of it. And I really didn't think I could do it, not just because of the anxiety I was feeling, and there's only ropes that you can hold on to. Lots of people die, and they always say, oh, lots of people die here, and they always die because they've let go of the rope. And I'm like, do I not need a harness? No, we don't do harnesses here, and you're like, oh, okay, just hold on to the ropes, When it's steep, hold on to the ropes and don't wander off, So that was anxiety provoking, but you could, they break the mountain down into 200 flights of stairs up, and obviously 200 flights of stairs down, so 400 flights of stairs. That's a lot of stairs. And the stairs are steep, so it's largely cut clay. So the steps are each about this. I mean, you cannot walk for days afterwards, because these muscles are just absolutely beasted. But it's a real step up. But what we did was not focus on climbing the mountain. It was focused on climbing the stairway. So every stairwell, climb to the top, look back, give thanks, and say you've done well. That's it. Okay, climb that stairs, climb those 12 stairs. Stop, look back, give thanks, turn around and climb the next set of stairs. The point being, if I'd focused on those 4,095 meters top to bottom, I would have just gone, I can't do it. And with that mental state I was in, I can't do this. But can you climb those 12 stairs, Will? That's the question. And not just can I climb them beasting myself in my head, but can I climb them and celebrate the fact that I've climbed them? That was key. So every point, climb 12 stairs, stop, turn around, thank you, well done, turn around, climb the next set of stairs. Ultimately, I'm not counting them down, but you're 200 stairs up by the time you get to the top. And then you're standing there with your hands in the air thinking, wow, I've made this. If we can break our stress experience or our stress response down to extension celebration, then actually we begin to unload really, really well, really, really regularly. I work with a client who's a kind of high-flying businessman, and I've been working with him on what's called micro-approvals, because he's just beating himself with a stress stick all day about achieving more. And I'm like, I prescribe you 8 micro approvals a day. So he has to think of 8 micro approvals for things that he's done well. Maybe hosting a meeting, maybe his technical skill he's enacted, maybe it's a good conversation with a colleague, maybe it's just he made a good cup of tea. Well done. Hey, I made a great cup of tea, well done. Because those micro approvals change his day. And I've already seen an absolute transformation in his experience and his joy, but also his stress massively dissipate, his joy massively rise, and his sense of achievement and accomplishment absolutely explode within him, because those micro approvals are not a boom or bust mentality. So most people are thinking, what's the next big thing I need to do so everyone will go, wow, you're amazing, OBE, incredible. If we're waiting for that, we're going to be waiting a long time, most of us beyond a lifetime. So that boom or bust mentality affects work. It can be a workflow thing, but also it can be an achievement thing. We need to say, actually, what do I deserve an OBE for today? Like this cup of tea, this good conversation with a colleague, the fact that I got out of bed, organized my stuff and got to work on time. All of that is good. All of that is helpful. And all of that will actually transform your response to stress. Because what we're doing here is we're finding out what Niebuhr calls this ability to acknowledge stress and to delineate between those things that I can address and those things I can't. In his prayer, God gives us the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, the courage to change the things that should be changed, and primarily the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other. So this is working out what should I be doing, what am I doing, and how can I tend to those things that only I can do or I need to do right now. Now I'd love you just to, in your pairs, just one last time, we're going to finish just in 5 minutes, but just have a chat with those around you just for a moment about that idea around light and shade and micro approvals, micro celebrations. What makes you feel resistant to micro celebrations or micro approvals? And what could you do tomorrow that would make a difference in that area of your life? What resistance do you feel to micro approvals and micro celebrations? What could you do differently tomorrow that would make a difference to your life? Okay, let's get a few ideas from the floor. What's interesting to see, what resistance do people feel to the idea of micro approvals, micro celebrations? Shout out. What's dissonant within us about that idea? Okay, it does positively, yeah. But what habits have we got within us that make it dissonant? What makes it difficult? Right, it's much easier, it's much more natural to micro-disapprove than micro-approve. Okay, give me a bit more on that. Yeah, I should have done it, would have, yeah, brilliant. Brilliant.
Our issue is more like getting lost in the macro approval.
Right.
Being like, oh, well, good cup of tea, but like, what does it matter?
Okay. But actually, that's a great example of that same critic, is actually that we don't deserve to celebrate the small moment, because in the big moment, it doesn't matter, it doesn't count. So what most of us experience is a sense of fraudulence when it comes to micro approvals. We feel like it doesn't matter. We say things to ourselves like, oh, well, it's kind of fraudulent because you're giving it to yourself. So actually it's got no worth. What really matters is that other people notice what you're doing and celebrate it. So we like the idea. I've never met anyone I've coached who hasn't liked the idea of micro approvals. But what they'd really like is me to do micro approvals, like to wander around behind them at work and go, yeah, you've done that really well. Well, yeah, well done. That's great. Yeah, it's such a good job. Good tea. Good colour. Perfect. Well done. That's what they would like. If I listened to their narrative, it would be like, oh yeah, that's a complete waste of time. You're wasting your time. Why are you telling yourself you're doing a really good job? Because you're probably not. It's probably useless. No one's noticed you anyway. What's the point of your life? That's the sort of narrative that we hold. That's not Jesus' narrative. That's the narrative that we hold, largely because that's what we familiarly learned to believe about ourselves. I want to encourage you to press into this idea. Yes?
Can you change that narrative?
Yes, you can.
With the micro?
Yes, you can. So I say that emphatically because a lot of the people I work with don't believe that they can hear anything other than the inner critic, what we call the inner critic. You mentioned, Rachel, what we call the bias to the negative. From an evolutionary perspective, not that I always take that perspective, but from that perspective, it's adaptive to believe the hostility of others over the welcome of others. And the reason for that is, if you believed another tribe were welcoming, and you went, hey, other tribe, brilliant, amazing, they would eat you. And if they ate you, obviously your optimism has led to your downfall. But if you wave at the other tribe and go, hey, you probably want to eat me, but I'm going to stay over here until I'm really sure you don't, your caution has defended you whether they want to eat you or not. So it pays to always take a bias to the negative, because the bias to the negative means if you lose, you never lose. But if you take a bias to the positive, if you lose big. So it's in our DNA to believe the negative over the positive. But we have to coach ourselves, and we can coach ourselves out of that. The key question is not, is it true, but does it change me? Because remember, our estimation of what's true is also distorted. If it's not God and it's not outside of ourselves, our ability to acknowledge it is often distorted and misplaced. I don't trust my ability to tell you what's good or not good. I can only tell you what God says, because ultimately I know that I can take something that's good and it can be bad, and something that's bad and it can be good. So I have to find objectivity in myself, and then I choose the action rather than the belief. I'm choosing to participate in an action of these moments of gratitude, these moments of appreciation, these moments of micro-approval. Go back to the staircase again. Who climbs the mountain faster? The person who climbs all of the staircases simultaneously, or the one who stops between staircases? No. Who objectively climbs the mountain faster, Luke? You're an elite runner, tell me. The person who stops or the person who carries on? Yeah, you thought you knew what the answer was, didn't you? Yeah, right. The person who doesn't stop climbs the mountain much faster than the person who stops. Who wants to climb the mountain again? That is the right answer. Well done. See, she did it right. So, inner critic there, feeding the critic. Right, so the person who climbs the mountain fast enough, the person who climbs the mountain faster, yeah, they're the one who doesn't stop. What's important is the person who wants to climb the mountain again. That's what matters in life. We are busy trying to race to the top and get back again, to start the next thing, to race to the top and get back again. Who wants to do that again? Who wants to face the same challenges again? Who wants to fulfill the same task again? No, of course no one does. That's why everyone's so desperate to find something new to challenge them. But what if it was just in the joy, in the gratitude, in the experience of doing it? Well, I would climb Kota Kinabalu again tomorrow if I could. I'd climb it even slower. I would savor every staircase even more determinedly. That would be life-changing. I might do it again if I can get back there. I'd love to climb it again. You see, this way of living is not about distress, it's about responding appropriately to the stress I'm actually experiencing. Now, we have to make a decision within ourselves to say, I'm grateful, I'm thankful, I'm experiencing that. That's a good moment. It's like eating chocolates one by one and saying, rather than just going, here's a box of chocolates, I'm just going to smash it. And I want you to kind of go away with that whole curious, grateful view in the light and shade and see how it affects you. This is a very incomplete seminar in many ways. But what I want to do is to seed you with some really significant life-changing ideas to provoke you to then live that out and go, this is one of those moments where I just want to stop, determine whether this is future or present focused, work out what my inner critic is saying I should do now and do something different. Actually celebrate. The weird thing is that your neuroplasticity means that you can actually retrain your brain, remarkably, even biologically, to be wired in new ways. At the moment, most people's brains are wired like a map of the motorways of Britain. If you go to Bristol, how do you go to Bristol? Down the... Right. Can anyone tell me another way of going to Bristol, please? No. There are thousands of different ways you could go to Bristol. on lots of small roads, lots of country tracks, lots of old roads we used to drive on. What's wrong with them? Are they not the fastest way to get to Bristol? What if we wanted to go down one of those roads instead? That would be the change of our neuroplasticity to say, actually, the best way of going to Bristol is not necessarily down the M4. The fastest way might be, although not with those 50-mile-an-hour limits in place, but the fastest way might be, but how do I want to drive there again? That's the question I want you to ask yourself. Let me just pray and then I'll let you get to your beds. Jesus, thank you that you call us to gratitude. We want to give you thanks and praise. But we pray the spirit of gratitude wouldn't be lost to us, but we would dwell in it, we'd wait in it, we'd live in it. And we pray that as we do, that our distress might melt into appropriate stress. Help us not to live in the sugar rush of the next task to fulfill, but to savor every moment and to acknowledge that you've created us in your image for good works you've prepared in advance for us to do. Help us to know which ones those are and which ones those aren't. And we pray tonight that whatever's good and wholesome and lasting would linger and take root, and anything that's just frivolous and nonsense would just fade away and fall to the ground. And we thank you that with you all things are possible, and particularly we pray tonight for that inner critic, that it would just be quiet and sit down. We pray tonight instead that you would speak your words of love and approval and affirmation over us, and that we'd know that they're true. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Thanks so much, everyone, for being with me tonight. I say, always, for all of you guys here at St. D's, always available as well to have those like little chats offline, and if there's stuff you just want to like press into more, just let's talk it through. So I'm available to you guys as you need. All right, bless you. Have a great evening, everyone.